Hello everyone! You know what it's time for, and I've got a lot to talk about today, so I'll get going. Let's mix it up this time and go through the movies I saw in chronological order. Older movies at the beginning, newer movies at the end, obligatory World War II movies sprinkled throughout. Movie number 1 is the 1934 version of The Painted Veil, starring Greta Garbo, Herbert Marshall, and George Brent as the three key players in W. Somerset Maugham's story of infidelity amid a cholera epidemic in Hong Kong. A little background here is in order on my standing on The Painted Veil. A long time ago, in my earliest days on YouTube, I did a library haul that included the book. I was planning to watch the 2006 movie with Naomi Watts and Edward Norton, but I felt like I ought to read the book first. Unfortunately, I did not like the book at all. I may or may not have thrown it against the wall when I finished it. It brought out some very intense feelings in me. Shortly after that, I did watch the 2006 adaptation, and I liked it much better. Probably because, at a certain point, it diverges from the book. It's a more romantic story than the one the book tells, and it's got some absolutely gorgeous cinematography and music. Given all these mixed feelings, I was hesitant to see this earlier version because there was such a strong chance that I might not like it, but last month I decided to bite the bullet and see it, and thank goodness I liked it, probably because it also diverged heavily from Somerset Maugham's original, in my opinion, awful ending. As you could guess from the movie poster, Greta Garbo is the big feature here, and she is her usual exotic, radiant self, wearing some classically edgy gowns designed by Adrian. Some of these costumes are on the unusual side. I think she's one of the few women who could pull them off, and props to her and the writers for turning a thoroughly selfish, unlikable character into someone more palatable and even sympathetic. But I'm kind of all about Herbert Marshall in this movie. I loved him. If ever I needed a reminder of how much I enjoy watching him act, and I do forget sometimes, this is it. The idea of someone preferring a caddish George Brent over subtle but ardent, gentlemanly Herbert Marshall is incomprehensible to me. No offense to George Brent, I love him in Dark Victory, but his character here is a jerk and I wanted to smack him. But what was most satisfying was that, like I said, this version also changes the ending, even more so than the 2006 version, and you know what? I am perfectly okay with that. I know that flies in the face of what I usually think and feel and say about adaptations, but for crying out loud, if I have to sit through a miserable story about infidelity and disease, I want a happy ending. Okay, movie number 2 is 1943's Guadalcanal Diary, a World War II movie following a group of U.S. Marines through the invasion of Guadalcanal. The movie features a good cast: Lloyd Nolan, William Bendix, Richard Conte, Anthony Quinn, Preston Foster, Richard Jekyll, and has some good fighting and attack scenes, as well as a nice dose of humor and camaraderie, something I've mentioned before that I'm a big fan of. After seeing Wake Island a couple months ago and finding William Bendix pretty annoying in that, I was starting to think I didn't like him, but while he was playing a similar character here, the kind of character Bendix often played, for whatever reason I liked him better. Movie number 3 is a 1945 film noir called Fallen Angel, in which Dana Andrews stars as a fast-talking con man who comes to town looking to make some dough and falls for an ambitious local waitress played by a sultry Linda Darnell. He's got stiff competition, though, from the other guys in town who are in love with her, some of them in twisted ways. This movie, which is directed by Otto Preminger and also stars Alice Faye as Darnell's polar opposite, turns into a murder mystery partway through, and the list of suspects is so lengthy that any outcome seems possible. My most overwhelming impression from this movie was how incredibly unlikable certain characters were, including Andrews and Darnell. Make that especially Andrews and Darnell. Dana Andrews' character is walking a thin line in this one. Is he a scumbag all the way through, or is he redeemable? I don't know, it's kinda hard to say. I kinda felt like he got better than he deserved in the end. Movie number 4. Can you tell that I'm trying to speed this up because I don't want to be sitting here forever? Movie number 4 is Secret Beyond the Door. a mystery romantic thriller from Fritz Lang that stars Joan Bennett as a wealthy woman who, after a whirlwind romance, marries a moody architect played by Michael Redgrave. They're very happy, except that sometimes he acts a little weird and she's afraid he might have a murderous past. This was a spooky movie, a sort of Rebecca meets Spellbound, full of strange characters all around. Joan Bennett's whispery, murmuring voiceover throughout kept me on edge, and was an unusual touch, voiceovers being common in noir, but not usually coming from women. And there's an unnerving performance from Michael Redgrave, whose character is sometimes overcome by a wide-eyed instability similar to that of his role in Dead of Night a couple years before this. The movie ends up being a little too Freudian for my taste, and there were some symbols or ideas set up that I felt didn't get much of a payoff, but I enjoyed the weirdness of it all and was satisfied with how things turned out. I do think I'm going to take a little break from the my husband might be trying to kill me movies for a little while. I've gotten a little oversaturated with those in the last few months. Movie number 5 is a western from 1950 called The Capture. I decided to check it out simply because it stars Teresa Wright, who's a favorite of mine, opposite Lou Ayres, playing a man who accidentally kills another man suspected of robbery. Then, as an act of atonement, or maybe of obsession, he goes to the guy's home, takes a job there as a farmhand, falls in love with his widow, and becomes a friend and father figure to his son. I honestly wasn't sure what to make of this movie. Its tone is kind of all over the place. Is it a crime drama, a thriller, a romance, a comedy? It's a little rough, but it did have its moments. Movie number 6 is a World War II POW movie from 1957 called The One That Got Away, about the only German POW to successfully escape and return to Germany. Hardy Kruger plays the German, a very wily and irrepressible character. His escape attempts are interesting, and while I didn't necessarily like his character, I admired his tenacity. Movie number 7 is another World War II movie, this one from 1958, called Carve Her Name with Pride. Based on a true story, this British war film stars Virginia McKenna as Violette Sabo, a young woman who marries a French soldier and, after his death, is recruited by the British to work as a spy and venture into German-occupied France. This is a tense movie, especially after her training starts around the halfway point. It's a gritty role, especially towards the end, and McKenna plays it with quiet intensity and strength. Paul Scofield co-stars as her fellow spy, who quietly nurses his feelings for her. Since I've only ever seen him when he was old, I wondered if I'd recognize him and kept being like, is that him? Wait, no, is that him? But then when his character did show up, I knew him immediately. Perhaps not by his face, but by his voice. On a side note, there were a lot of things in this that reminded me of the book Codename Verity. So many, in fact, that I'm thinking that this story, Violette Sabo's story, must have been at least a partial influence on the writing of that book. It might have said so. I just can't remember. Movie number 8 is a western from 1959 called No Name on the Bullet, which stars Audie Murphy in an unusually ambiguous, amoral role as a paid assassin so notorious throughout the West that when he rides into town, rumors fly and even the most respected citizens start to worry. Every man has a skeleton in his closet, it seems, a reason why someone in the world would pay to have him killed. This one was described to me by a friend as a psychological western, and I have to agree with that term. It's fascinating to watch the effects of paranoia and guilt on the community as everyone wonders who the assassin has come for. Society breaks down and reckless men start taking law and order into their own hands, and the hitman doesn't have to say or do a thing. Movie number 9 is the 1963 version of The Day of the Triffids. Some of you may remember that a little while ago I did a mini book review of the sci-fi classic by John Wyndham, and I mentioned that there were a few adaptations out there. Well, this is one of them, starring Howard Keel, which I had a really hard time picturing. I mean, he's the smiling musical guy from Kiss Me Kate, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, Calamity Jane, Annie Get Your Gun, Showboat. He's not really the type I imagine playing the protagonist in a super serious apocalyptic horror thriller about killer plants. But, you know, he wasn't so out of place as I'd expected. He doesn't sing, and he tones down his customary swagger quite a bit. As far as the rest of the movie goes, it was alright. It's not very close to the book at all. There's an entire subplot added about an unhappy couple doing science in a lighthouse, but it was actually pretty interesting seeing how the Triffid invasion affected them, their work, and their relationship. The major framework of the story remains the same, or sort of the same, even though significant portions are cut. And yes, the special effects are cheesy. The Triffids are basically tricked out Venus flytraps, and the walking effect is really bumpy. But for what it was, I enjoyed it well enough. Movie number 10 is the 1981 version of The Day of the Triffids. Yup, we watched two versions last month, though not back-to-back. I actually would have preferred to wait a few months in between because I like to space things out like that, but my mom was very eager to see both of them, so I relented. She doesn't like waiting. The 1981 version is a BBC miniseries starring John Dudding and Emma Ralph, and it follows the John Wyndham story to a T. There are really only two things I can think of that are noticeably different, and they're minor, so in that sense it was very satisfying. This one's comprised of 6 episodes, which makes it sound long, but they're short, even shorter if you skip the opening recap and the credits. I really appreciated how this one goes deeper into the breakdown of society, and they do a better job of making the Triffids look like an unknown species. This miniseries isn't super high-tech or fancy or anything, but it did a good job. Movie number 11 is the last war movie for today, 1987's Empire of the Sun, directed by Steven Spielberg and starring a very young Christian Bale as a boy living in Shanghai on the eve of the Japanese invasion who gets separated from his parents and must survive on his own. Bale does a great job carrying the burden of the entire movie on his shoulders, and it's a long movie, 2.5 hours. I do think it could have been tightened up a bit here and there, and yet supposedly a lot of it was cut and certain actors' screen time greatly reduced. It's a difficult story, with the emotional trauma of Jim's separation from his parents, the strangeness of coming of age in an internment camp, and his innocence and confusion concerning those he meets along his journey, as well as the Japanese, whose noble fighting spirit and aircrafts he admires. I did have a sense of dread through the whole thing, though, and toward the end it felt like kind of an emotional roller coaster. It was very up and down, and every other scene felt like it was the final scene, and then it would keep going. I think I've come away feeling like it was a very well-acted, well-made movie, but I didn't find it tremendously enjoyable. Okay, we're going to jump forward into very recent territory now. Movie number 12 is Murder on the Orient Express, which came out just last year. I wasn't thrilled when I saw the trailers for this one, so I wasn't looking forward to seeing it. I knew my mom wanted to see it though, and like I said, she doesn't like to wait too long, so when it showed up on my library's new releases shelf, I picked it up. Here's the thing. Aside from the fact that A, I hated Kenneth Branagh's ridiculous mustache, B, his characterization of Poirot was touch and go, and I didn't like a lot of the choices he made, and C, there was an awful lot of extra stuff added to make the movie more exciting, aside from all that, I'm just not sure that this story translates well to the screen. Without giving away too much for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the mystery relies heavily on a past event. It's been ages since I read the book, but I seem to remember that that past event was introduced very smoothly and naturally. But on film, it comes up so suddenly, and Poirot's subsequent suppositions make it seem as if he's omniscient or capable of reading minds. Poirot's a great detective, but he's not supernatural or anything. The book was my first Poirot, I think, and I loved it. The reveal blew my mind. But I found the 2010 David Suchet version underwhelming too, which is what makes me think there's a bigger issue at play. I'm just not sure if a truly satisfying adaptation of this particular Agatha Christie novel is possible. But to be fair, my opinion isn't all negative. I enjoyed seeing the all-star cast and the performances that ranged from sufficient to very good, and I was quite moved at the climactic moment, especially by Michelle Pfeiffer's performance, and her singing over the end credits was a nice, personalized touch. Movie number 13, also from 2017, is, hold on, this is gonna be really different, Thor Ragnarok. Okay, I am not really into the whole superhero movie thing, and that probably doesn't come as a surprise to you all, but I have seen a few of the Marvel Comics movies. I saw Thor, and I saw The Avengers, saw that one twice actually, and I saw Thor: The Dark World. What do all these have in common? Well, yes, Thor, obviously, but also his brother Loki. Yes, in my crazy Tom Hiddleston fangirl days, I was willing to watch all these comic book movies that I wouldn't really be interested in otherwise, just to see him play Loki. However, in the lead up to its release, I wasn't too interested in the Phase 3 Thor movie since I'm not an obsessed Hiddlestoner anymore, and since The Dark World was kinda blah, and since there's a whole bunch of these movies I haven't bothered to see. And when I say a whole bunch, I mean like 16, 19? I've lost count. But then when it came out, everybody was raving about it, so I decided to check it out after all, and great Scott, it was a ton of fun. The characters, the cameos, the humor, the music, Cate Blanchett hamming it up, Jeff Goldblum possibly not even acting at all, Taika Waititi's direction, all of it's super wacky, and I was fully prepared for it to be too much, but it wasn't, and I had a really good time with it. Thor was much more likable in this than in the other movies I've seen. The haircut helps, but I like that he's not as cocky and actually kind of adorkable. Oh, and Tom Hiddleston? Yeah, he's still hot and still killing it as Loki. I said that I'm not obsessed anymore, not that I'm dead. Movie number 14 is also from 2017, and oh boy, here we go. It's Star Wars Episode VIII, The Last Jedi. I almost don't even want to talk about this movie because I feel like no matter what I say, someone's gonna come along and disagree with me, and this is why it's not fun to talk about Star Wars on the internet anymore. The fans are too scary. Not all of them. I know that some of you are fans, and you're nice people, and I love you for that. But, come on, you know what I'm talking about. I've seen nasty comments like, Episode 8 is a complete joke, and it's an insult to Star Wars fans, and it's a good movie, it's just not a Star Wars movie. What does that even mean? The internet is full of videos and articles talking about why Episode 8 is the worst Star Wars movie ever, and you know what? I'm sick of it. Everybody just needs to calm down. I need to calm down. I'm not doing this. I'm not going on a rant. I'm not going down this road. No, we're not doing this. The truth is, while I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, I'm in the weird position of having to defend this movie because I thought it was alright. Did I absolutely love it? No. But I didn't absolutely love any of the other movies either. Space fantasy sagas just aren't my thing. But there are parts of each movie, even the prequels, that I think are very good, and I definitely think the amount of ire this one has drawn from the fans is excessive. I know a lot of people were mad about the portrayal of Luke Skywalker, but even though some of the things, or maybe all of the things he did were unexpected, I thought Mark Hamill did a good job, and was funny too. The humor overall in this one works better than it did in Episode 7, I thought, mainly because there was less of it, and I didn't feel like I was being peppered with one-liners and fan service. Yes, Leia's astral projection, or Mary Poppins moment, or whatever you want to call it, was weird and looked silly, but other than that, I thought this was some of Carrie Fisher's best work as Leia, a fine, gracious note to end on. Do I agree with a lot of the criticism regarding the subplots with Finn and Rose and the wild horses and Poe being misled for uncertain reasons? Yes. Well, partially. I didn't think that stuff was as much of a slog as some other people did. But the main storyline with Rey is the more interesting one, and there were definitely a few frustrating times when the action would cut away to one of the subplots, and I was like, no, go back to... I don't care about that. Go back to the throne room. That scene was awesome, by the way. I would say that my favorite scene in The Force Awakens was probably the lightsaber duel in the snow between Kylo Ren and Rey. It opened up some interesting possibilities, so I enjoyed seeing what direction they went in with them in this movie. I like the intriguing dynamic between those two characters. In other words, being a Reylo shipper would be totally up my alley. Like, that's exactly the kind of thing that 17-year-old me would be on board for. He's a villain, he's a conflicted villain, he's got all the black clothing and a cape and that crazy red lightsaber. I love red and black. They're enemies and they're trying to kill each other, and then they become allies, and then each one's trying to win the other one over, but then is there something more going on? Yeah, this is just the kind of thing that would send a younger me on the hunt for angsty fanfiction, and I know it exists, because I've looked it up. Okay, last one. Oh my goodness, I can't believe how long this video is. Movie number 15 is 2018's The Commuter, Liam Neeson's latest action flick in which he plays an ex-cop and insurance salesman who unexpectedly loses his job and accepts a sketchy proposition on his ride home that spirals out of control. This action thriller was directed by the same guy who made Non-Stop, with the same star and kind of a similar premise. Unfortunately, I found Non-Stop pretty forgettable, and I'm afraid I might feel the same way about this movie. There were things that bothered me about it plot-wise. For a former policeman, Neeson's character does a lot of incredibly foolish things. And I found the digital effects distracting. There's a lot of CGI, which I know is pretty much unavoidable with movies these days, but in some movies it looks better than in others, and it just didn't look too good here. The fight scenes were what looked the most bizarre. Did they speed the action up, slow it down, do something to fix it? All the physics of the fight looked off. So I wasn't a big fan of this one. I found it sufficiently entertaining for one night, but I don't expect it will leave a lasting impression. Woo! Okay, that's it. I got a little carried away on some of those movies. I know these are supposed to be mini reviews, but I just can't help myself sometimes. Let me know your thoughts on anything that I mentioned, whether you agreed with me or not. I'm always curious to know what you guys think, so go ahead and leave a comment below if you'd like, and I will be back in a few days. Thanks for watching!